I need you to stay with me for a moment, because what I'm about to explain isn't just another political headline. Late last week, something happened behind the scenes in Washington that rarely happens anymore. And when it does, it tells you the system is under real stress. The President of the United States personally called a senator from his own party and unleashed a torrent of anger at her. Not a rival, not the opposition, one of his own. And the reason matters more than the call itself. She voted to limit his authority. That detail changes everything. So what we're watching right now is not political theater. It's not the familiar routine where lawmakers express concern in public and fall in line when it counts. This is something far more serious. Members of the president's own party are actively using the law to restrain him, specifically on matters involving military power. To find a comparable moment, you'd have to go back decades. This kind of internal resistance to a sitting president, especially on questions of war and peace, is extraordinarily rare. Picture the scene. It's late on Capitol Hill. The buildings are quiet, but phones are buzzing nonstop. Staffers are exchanging messages. Senators are refreshing vote tallies, double-checking what they're seeing because it doesn't fit the usual pattern. The president attacking the media. He's lashing out at Democrats. He's furious at Republicans. And for the first time in years, they are retreating. I've watched this town long enough to recognize the difference between performance and real resistance. I've seen senators express grave concern and then vote with the president anyway. I've seen anonymous quotes, dramatic statements, and carefully worded tweets that lead nowhere. This is not that. This is Republicans joining Democrats to move a war powers resolution, a legal mechanism designed to prevent a president from committing U.S. forces to conflict without congressional approval. Let that sink in. Lawmakers from the president's own party looked at his behavior, his rhetoric, and the direction things were heading, and concluded that legal guardrails were necessary. Not as a symbolic gesture, as an emergency measure. That's not disagreement. That's intervention. And how did the president respond? Not with outreach, not with negotiation, not with explanation. He exploded, reports indicate. He berated Senator Susan Collins with profanity and threats, attempting to bully her into reversing her vote. And that reaction tells you more than any speech ever could. When a leader responds to constitutional limits with rage instead of dialogue, it reveals how they actually see power, not as something delegated by law, not as something shared among branches of government, but as something personal, something owned. And that belief is exactly what triggered this pushback. Now here's what set all of this in motion. And I need you to sit with it, because at first it sounds unbelievable. The president has publicly floated the idea of using military force to acquire Greenland, not as a joke, not as satire, on camera, repeatedly. Greenland belongs to Denmark, a NATO ally, a country the United States is treaty-bound to defend. That's where this stops being absurd and starts being dangerous. Under NATO's core principle, an attack on one member is treated as an attack on all. If the United States were to use force against Danish territory, it wouldn't just be a dispute with Denmark. It would mean conflict with the alliance itself, with Europe, with our own allies. Senators have now been forced to take that scenario seriously, not as speculation, but as a real risk created by presidential rhetoric. In any previous era, statements like this would have ended a political career overnight, but we're not in that era anymore. To understand why this is happening, you have to understand how this president actually thinks. Not the caricature, not the campaign slogans, his operating logic. He doesn't view alliances as mutual obligations. He doesn't see treaties as binding commitments. He doesn't treat international law as a shared framework. He sees everything as a transaction. Winners and losers, leverage and weakness, assets to acquire, opponents to dominate. That mindset works in real estate. It fails catastrophically in geopolitics. Countries have armies. Alliances have tripwires. Threats don't disappear once spoken. When a president says military force is an option against allied territory, that's not negotiating. It's destabilizing the entire system. Allies hear it, adversaries hear it, military planners hear it, and once those calculations shift, you can't undo them with a press release. Republican senators understand this. Many of them have sat through classified briefings. They've watched small miscalculations spiral into global crises. They know how fast things can get out of control. That's why they're alarmed. Not because they've suddenly changed ideology, but because they can see where this road leads. The War Powers Act exists for moments like this. It was written after Vietnam. When Congress finally confronted how easily presidents had dragged the country into war without authorization, it's an emergency brake. And Republicans just pulled it against their own president. That alone should tell you how serious this is. That angry phone call wasn't really about one vote. It was a window into how the president processes resistance. He doesn't see dissent as democracy functioning. He sees it as betrayal, as something to crush. And that reaction matters because how a leader responds to being told no tells you how they'll behave when pressure intensifies. His entire strategy is built on projecting inevitability, total dominance, the idea that opposition is futile. Nothing punctures that image faster than members of your own party defying you in public. So he lashed out. And here's the part that may matter most. It didn't work. The votes didn't change. The senators held their ground. That failure of intimidation is significant because it exposes something has never fully accepted. Political loyalty is conditional. It lasts only as long as it serves mutual interest. When a leader becomes a liability, the math changes. And that calculation is happening right now. So at the same time this fight over war powers was unfolding, another move happened in parallel. The president declared a national emergency tied to Venezuelan oil assets. On the surface, it sounded like energy policy, but look closer. The timeline for any real benefit is distant. The infrastructure requirements are massive. The primary beneficiaries aren't ordinary Americans. So why declare an emergency? Because emergencies concentrate power. They bypass oversight. They shift authority away from Congress and into the executive. Emergencies are meant for imminent crises, not strategic convenience. But here, they've become a pattern. Every time scrutiny builds, a new emergency appears. The focus shifts. Accountability gets buried under urgency. This isn't accidental. It's a strategy. And while headlines focus on dramatic confrontations, something quieter is happening underneath. Oversight documentation, timelines. Senators are asking procedural questions. Why are documents delayed? Why are deadlines slipping? Why aren't promised disclosures happening? Those questions matter more than speeches ever will, because process creates records. Records create paper trails, and paper trails don't respond to intimidation. They sit there waiting. Oversight isn't partisan warfare. It's how democratic systems function. And when a president treats oversight as sabotage, the system destabilizes what Republican senators are really worried about. Isn't just this president. It's the precedent. Once norms break, they don't magically repair themselves. Powers claimed today become tools tomorrow. If emergencies can bypass Congress whenever convenient, future presidents will do the same. If threats against allies go unchecked, the next leader will push further. That's why some Republicans are finally drawing lines, not out of affection for the opposition, but out of concern for the institution itself. They're asking whether Congress will still matter if they don't act now. This isn't ideological, it's structural, and the consequences aren't abstract. Military families feel reckless rhetoric first. Workers feel destabilized trade relationships. Markets respond to unpredictability. Allies recalibrate trust. Ordinary people pay the price when government becomes erratic. So where does this go? Watch the votes, watch the oversight requests, watch who survives politically after saying no, watch how the president's language escalates under pressure, and watch whether resistance grows or collapses. Because this moment isn't really about one man. It's about whether rules are stronger than individuals, whether power is constrained or personal, whether democracy bends, breaks, or holds. And right now, the resistance isn't coming from the outside, it's coming from within. From people who know him, worked with him, defended him, and decided that some lines can't be crossed. That doesn't guarantee an outcome. History is full of systems that failed after moments like this, but it does mean the story isn't over yet. What happens next depends on choices. And those choices are being made right now. Quietly, in rooms without cameras, it'll be watching, and you should too.